Welcome to the Great Path Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony B. Today, we are digging right into part 3 of our 10-part series. And today, we are going to discuss the tyrant Mufasa from Disney's The Lion King. Now, for this episode, I'm going to assume that most of my listeners have, in fact, watched the movie or have some sort of working knowledge of this movie, as I don't want to spend a whole lot of time recapping. If you're not familiar with it, go out and watch it. It is a Disney classic. Apparently, they have also remade it in like CGI. I haven't watched that one. I've just watched the classic cartoon. So again, just fair warning, I'm going to work on the assumption that everybody has watched the movie, everybody's familiar with the movie, and that way we don't have to waste any time. So jumping right into it, traditionally speaking, Mufasa is considered to be a hero in the Disney universe. He is the father of Simba, who is the primary protagonist in The Lion King. Mufasa is voiced by James Earl Jones, also known as the man who voiced Darth Vader. And he's made out to be this benevolent king, this good, righteous, just person who was unjustly killed by his brother Scar, and thus essentially orphaning Simba. I'm here to tell you, I think that's bullshit. I actually think Mufasa is, in a lot of ways, maybe not the villain of the movie, because Scar gets a bad rap, but he also does some questionable things. But I do believe that Mufasa is a villain of The Lion King. And I have a lot of different reasons on why I feel that way. A lot of it kind of centers around Mufasa's religion, if you will, which is the Circle of Life. Now, that's probably the single most famous song of the movie, I believe, if I'm correct. It was sung by Elton John. It was a big move. It was a big component to the movie, was this song, The Circle of Life. But if you follow the movie's mythology, that's essentially Mufasa's religion. It's what he believes in. He believes that everything in the universe is cyclical, but he uses this religion to do some pretty terrible things, which our history, human history, can say, religion tends to play a pretty bad role when it comes to subjugating others. Mufasa is really no different. He is a tyrant king. So one of the things I want to point out that maybe people didn't realize is in Mufasa's pride, and a pride is what's called that large group of lions. Mufasa's got a very large pride of which he is the alpha from. Now, what's weird is, other than Scar, who is Mufasa's brother, there are no other males shown or discussed in that pride. Now, that's strange. For a pride that large, when you're talking 30 plus lions, there should probably be between probably 3 and 5 males, and of course, including the alpha, but there isn't. So, I mean, at first it'd be okay, maybe they just neglected to mention it, but I don't think so, because if you look at Mufasa's other actions, I think it's highly likely that he either killed the other males or he banished them. And I say this because I really want to talk a lot about Mufasa's treatment of the hyenas. Now, the hyenas in The Lion King are viewed as evil. They're introduced as bad. As viewers, we're made to think they are evil, they're bad, good when they get killed. But let's think about what actually happened to them. When we're introduced to the hyenas, they're first mentioned when Mufasa is taking Simba, up to show him his kingdom. And there's that famous line, everything the light touches will be yours. And then, of course, there's like a shadowy area. And Simba's like, what's that over there? And Mufasa's like, oh, fuck those people. Don't go there. That's the Badlands. You don't want to go there. Bad things happen there. And the truth is that whole area is this nasty, desolate region where nothing really grows and nothing really lives except for the hyenas that Mufasa has banished there. Now, again, let's think about that. Lions are carnivores. They are hunters. What do they do? How does Mufasa justify his carnivoristic ways? He says it's a circle of life. Simba's like, what about the antelope? And he's like, oh, well, we eat the antelope, but when we die, we become grass. Okay, well, let's stop for a second. He's justifying his position as a predator, which we all know predators are required for, in order for an ecosystem to thrive, you need to have predators. Being a predator does not make you, by definition, bad. But he justifies his predator ways by saying, oh, well, when we die, we fertilize the ground grows grass, antelope eat the grass. Well, yeah, that might be the case, but those lions are probably going to eat three, four, 500 antelope in their lifetime. And then when they die, they're going to create a patch of grass that might feed like one or two antelope for, I don't know, a day or two. So I don't know that it's really a fair comparison. But anyway, the point being is he banishes the hyenas, and you kind of find out by just listening that the reason for the banishing of the hyenas is that they don't follow the circle of life, that they eat more than their fair share, that they're stupid, dim-witted, dumb. That's that's garbage. I mean, okay, I understand he may not like the hyenas. Okay, they're kind of competition. But his reason, and he didn't just like, "Oh, I don't like you, so I'm gonna put you down." No, he banishes them. He banishes them to that desolate wasteland where nothing really grows and nothing really lives. Well, hyenas are carnivorous. They eat flesh just like the lions. He banishes an entire people to essentially slowly starve to death because essentially he doesn't like them. That does not sound like a hero to me. That does not sound like the good guy. That sounds like a tyrant. That sounds like someone who wants to make sure that people don't challenge his authority. And then when Simba, because Simba's a fucking little punk prince kid, does what any punk prince kid's gonna do when he's told not to do something, he decides, fucking, I'm going to the Shadowlands. I'm gonna find out what's going on over there. So he goes there, and oh, big surprise, he's confronted by the hyenas who want to eat him. Well, hyenas eat meat. Hyenas have been banished. You know, their entire species has been banished here by this tyrant king Mufasa. Someone comes into what they're told is their land. Yeah, they're going to fucking eat that kid. So then what happens? Mufasa invades their land, fucks them up, and then tells them that they're in the wrong. But I don't believe that's the case. I mean, there's a lot of applicability to what's going on in the real world. I want to kind of go through some talking points before I get into the real world applicability of that. But that's wrong. You know, you banish this entire species of people, and then yeah, granted, you know, Mufasa wants to defend his child. I get that, but blaming the hyenas for his kid's own stupidity when they didn't come into the Pride lands and snatch Simba, Simba came into their land. You know, maybe keep a better eye on your kid. I guess that's what comes to mind there. So let's talk a little bit more about this circle of life because it's such a fundamental thing to the Lion King universe, and it's kind of the basis of Mufasa's rule. Is this concept of we do what it takes to maintain the circle of life, which is another fancy way of we allow nature to thrive and flourish as it's intended to. Yet he completely banishes the hyenas. Now, the fact, I mean, I don't know a ton about hyenas. I looked some stuff up, but the fact of the matter is hyenas have a purpose. They would not have been like they would not have evolved and had a place in the ecosystem if they didn't serve a purpose. You know, they're made out to be these stupid, bottomless pits of hunger in the movie, but in reality, they're not just scavengers. They don't just like slink behind other meals. You know, they're hunters in and of their own rights. They're skilled hunters. They have very social circles. You know, lions are known. I don't know how much my listeners know about lions, but lion politics when it comes to kids is not good. Typically, if one alpha takes over another alpha's pride, he kills all the cubs. He kills them all. You know, hyenas don't do that. Oftentimes, hyenas will actually adopt pups of other people, as opposed to kill them outright or abandon them. You know, so they're social creatures. They have a place. They can help. You know, they can help stop overpopulation because they'll pick off the slower, older animals. I mean, they serve a role in the circle of life. But Mufasa's not interested in hearing about that. He just doesn't like them. So he rejects a component of this big religion. You know, he rejects the hyenas from their role in the circle of life while still telling everyone else that, oh, we need to respect the circle of life. We need to respect the circle of life. And it's just trash. It's garbage. I'm going to talk a little bit about that more when we get into the real world applicability part, because there's a lot of parallels between, I think what happens in the United States when it comes to economic standing and several things, but we'll get into that here shortly. Um, So the other thing about the circle of life that I wanted to bring up is, Mufasa again. That's just like if he was well, he's a king, but let's say if he was a typical politician, his big talking point, circle of life, circle of life. Well, it's really fucking easy to preach the circle of life when you're at the fucking top. It's supposed to be a circle. There's no top, but let's face it, he is an apex predator. He is the top of the food chain. No one's eating him. He's eating everybody else. Well, it's really easy to say, hey, we all need to do our part and embrace our place when his place is at the top of that food chain. That doesn't make him noble. That doesn't make him a good leader, but that definitely shows that he's coming from a place where maybe he doesn't understand what it's like for the antelope to be hunted, or he doesn't understand what it's like for the bass to be snatched out of the water, or any of the other myriad of animals who are regularly preyed upon. And again, there's nothing wrong with predators. They serve a very essential role. I mean, I'm a meat eater. I eat meat. I love meat. But if we're looking at why we're supposed to feel that Mufasa is this noble leader, I don't think he is, because there's other ways in which he could have handled things. The biggest part, of course, is his treatment of the hyenas. I mean, even his treatment of his brother. Now, granted, in the Lion Kingdom, there is a lot of, alphaism, if you will. Violence is used pretty regularly in, maintaining the alpha position. But, his brother is the only other male lion that we, the viewers, are made aware of in the pride. But even Scar lives kind of on the outskirts of the pride, if you will. He's not like a central role. He's kind of an outsider, if you will. And Scar befriends the hyenas. And yes, he has his own ambitions. He wants to rule the pack, but he brings them food. He essentially takes these displaced people and he feeds them. And he says, you've been given a shit hand. And if the opportunity comes, will you have my back? And he sets the stage, which eventually leads to Mufasa's death, using the hyenas, and then of course Simba doesn't die, but Simba self exiles after it. But if you compare Mufasa to Scar, I think Scar ultimately was a better leader for everyone. I mean, we're meant to think of him as the villain. We're meant to see him as the villain. He does villainous things when we see him in the movie. But if we actually stop and we take a good look at what he does, I don't know that he's necessarily wrong. I think he sees that his brother was misguided, misplaced in what he was doing to the hyenas. And yeah, he needed the hyenas' muscle essentially to take over the pride. But when Scar goes to the hyenas and he says, "Hey, you work with me and I'll bring you back to the Pride Lands," he doesn't promise them wealth or, power or anything. He just says, "Hey, I'll make sure you have food. I'll make sure your kids don't die. I'll make sure you can at least feed yourselves." And when Mufasa dies and Scar takes over the pride, that's exactly what he does. He lets the hyenas come back into the Pride Lands and he keeps his promise. Now, the thing is there was nothing stopping Scar once he took over the pride to just using the pride, 30 some lions, and just slaughtering the hyenas wholesale. I mean, I don't think that would have even been a fair fight. But he doesn't do that. He lets them back in, he lets them eat. And then of course, during Scar's rule, a drought occurs and that makes food scarce, which causes a lot of tension, so on and so forth. But I mean, that's not Scar's fault. I mean, I don't want to jive too much into Scar, but he's essentially blamed for this drought, which is bullshit because he didn't cause the drought, but he's blamed for this drought. So of course, food becomes scarce, the hyenas become skittish, and then, the rest of the movie takes place. So, I mean, when you compare the two, Scar, yeah, he's a shifty looking dude, hands down, but he was better for the people, for the whole kingdom. And if that's supposed to be the rule, that the Lion King is king of everybody. I mean, you see during Circle of Life that the song, other fucking animals bowing to the lions, which is ridiculous, but okay. If he's supposed to be, if whoever rules, whoever is the Lion King is the king of everybody, Scar was a more benevolent king than Mufasa was, because Scar was real about it. He wasn't out there preaching his circle of life doctrine. He wasn't banishing people because they don't believe in what he believes in. That's what a tyrant does. That's what a dictator does. Scar definitely had his pros and his cons, but he was upfront about who he was. Mufasa was not. He was a sham. He was he just he wasn't a hero. He really wasn't. Now let's talk a little bit about some real world applicability to some of the things that we've discussed here today. So I want to come back a little bit to about how easy it is to talk about a circle of life system, because it reminds me a lot. And I try not to get political on the show, but who cares? We're going to get political a little bit. It reminds me a lot of what tends to be happening here in the US, especially in the last, I don't know, 12, 16 years. There's been a huge divide in the economic standing in the United States. There has. You keep seeing it on the news and stuff. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And there's a lot more complexity to it than that. But yeah, that's pretty much the truth. The gap between the wealthy and the poor just keeps getting larger, and the middle class keeps getting smaller. And that's, and of course, there's two sides of the aisle. Some people are like really far to the left, and you know, they want to do crazy social programs. They want to. I don't say crazy as in like that's bad. I say like they want to do some rather involved social programs. And then you have people on the right who are like, oh, we don't want to do anything. And then we have people on the I don't even know what you want to call them. You have another political class that wants government's hand out of everything. But what I always find interesting is, in America, you always hear, oh, it's the American dream, the American dream. You work hard, you work this, da, 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 and you'll pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, and I've said this in other episodes, and it's the truth. If you don't realize that that's a complete fucking lie, let me tell you, it's a complete fucking lie. It doesn't really exist, at least not in the way that they like to make you believe. But that whole concept, again, reminds me of the circle of life, because it's this talking point, this, oh, well, you work a dead end job and you do this and you do that and you work really hard and one day you'll have everything you want. It's often being pushed by the people who already have everything that they want, people who are already in positions where they are without want. So yeah, it's easy, just like Mufasa, it's easy to say it's the circle of life. It's okay that I eat you because one day I'll die and some other of your species will be fed because of it. I mean, it's essentially trickle down economics. In a nutshell, it's trickle down economics. It's this concept that those at the super top are able to get these vast tax breaks, these vast sums, these vast privileges, and then it trickles down to the people below. But when you say the term trickle down, what are we talking about? We're talking about scraps. We're talking about droplets. We're not talking about the sea, the ocean. And that's part of my problem with Mufasa. He's one of those super privileged, super wealthy. He is without want. So it's easy to say, oh, I get to do what I want because it's all part of a circle. Eventually you'll get yours. He's not the one suffering, waiting for the trickle down. So there's a lot to be said there when you hear that. Yeah, if you're the one at the top of the food chain, it's easy to talk about a circle. But what happens when you're on the very bottom of it? Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's kind of what happened to the hyenas. They weren't at the bottom of the food chain, but they were at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, and they were left to die. And Mufasa felt he was fully justified because they didn't buy in to his religion that it was okay for them and their children to die. And we, without calling it, I think we can all draw some parallels to things happening in the world where we see situations like that, where entire peoples are being displaced and left to die because they don't prescribe to one particular religion or another. That's not goodness, guys. That's not goodness at all. And another good lesson I think we can draw from studying Mufasa as a villain versus Mufasa as the hero is, I think it really kind of shows the need for tolerance, which is something I feel that is in short supply these days. Mufasa very much could have benefited by having some tolerance of people different than him. The hyenas were different than him. They are. They look different. They cackle, they're not the prettiest of animals, but they served a role. But he didn't care. He didn't like them. He thought they were stupid, dumb, ugly. He felt, he felt they were excessive. And so he banishes an entire people because he doesn't like them. So, I mean, tolerance is the key in anything in life. When you're going through life, you're always going to meet people you don't like, people that are different, they look different, they act different, they sound different. You know, does that mean you're rude to them, you banish them, you cut them out? No, you need to develop some tolerance. You need to learn to view things from other people's point of views. Did Mufasa ever sit down and think about what it was like to be a hyena? What it was like from the hyena's point of view? Did he stop for a second and think, well, what about the hyena children, like, or cubs or pups or whatever they're called? Tolerance is key, and it's one thing, tolerance is something that is not held by a tyrant, and Mufasa had no tolerance because Mufasa was a tyrant. And lastly, and this is a much larger conversation, I don't want to dig too deeply into it. I want to talk a little bit about privilege because Mufasa, Simba, all of those lions, they had privilege. They were privileged enough to be the apex predator in their environment. Just like humans are basically the apex predator in our environment, we don't have concerns that lower people lower on the totem pole have. For Mufasa, life was easy. For Simba, life was even easier because he was the kid, he was the prince, he was the heir apparent. Life was easy for him. So what happens when you get privilege is you stop to think about what it's like if you didn't have those things. I don't think Mufasa ever stopped for a moment and thought what it would be like to live as something other than a lion. And of course, the counter argument is, well, he's a lion, he should live as such. Okay, in a vacuum, sure, I get that. But when you're supposed to be ruling over a diverse species, or a diverse collection of species, you can't sit there with a speciesist's view. You can't sit there with this viewpoint that, oh, just because it was easy for me, or just because, eventually I die and fertilize grass, it's okay that I eat you. You can't do that. That's privilege. And again, I know that we're getting to the hyper political territory here, and it's not normal for this show, but I want to explore this just a little bit farther so I can kind of get my point across here. Privilege is something that those who have it oftentimes don't realize they have it. And just because you have it, it does not discount the work you put in to get where you're at. And this was something that I personally struggled with for a very long time because I am a white male. And, you know, yeah, I experience the world differently as a white male than people who are not white males do. I have had a very challenging life. I have worked very hard in my life to get where I'm at. And when I first heard that term, white privilege, I took a lot of offense to it because I felt that it was in some way discounting the struggles that I had to get where I'm at. But in talking to some of my smarter friends, I reached out to an old college professor who's a good friend of mine by the name of Matt. I reached out to him because I'm always one who wants to be able to see the views of others, unlike Mufasa. I wanted to understand what this was, and I wanted to understand why this phrase made me so angry because I had a hard go of it. Things were not handed to me. So I didn't understand why everyone was trying to claim that, I had this privilege, I had this advantage when I still had to scrape and struggle and fight to get where I'm at. And it was the realization that the privilege, this concept of white privilege, it's not that, oh, you're white, so everything comes easy for you. It's the concept that there are experiences that are regular to those who are not white males. There are things that they experience daily that we can't understand because we don't experience them because of our outward appearance. And it's a challenging thing to wrap your brain around, but it's kind of like how the world for a gazelle is different than a world for a lion. For the gazelle, that gazelle constantly has to be on guard because people are trying to eat it. The lion does not need to worry about that. The lion can saunter through the pridelands without fear of being eaten because they are at the top of the food chain. That's a privilege. That's not saying that they need to feel guilty about it, because I don't think they need to feel guilty about it. But it's something that the lion should be aware of. Their experience in the world is different than the experience of the gazelle. The gazelle has things to worry about that the lion won't even understand. That's the basis of privilege. That's something that Mufasa has. That's something that Simba has. I mean, Simba had a nice journey when he was in exile, but he still has that privilege because he's still an apex predator and he's royalty. He's the heir apparent. Privilege, I don't think, is inherently evil. I personally don't believe that, but I think it needs to be made aware of. I think at least it needs to be acknowledged because, especially those who are in positions that give them inherent advantages, need to be aware that those advantages make it so that they don't ever have to experience some things that are very real to other people. And in our world, that is the case. So I want people, basically, from this episode, I want you to think, I want you to take this lesson, this conversation we had, and I want you to, when you go about your daily routine, just maybe have a little more tolerance for people who are different than you. Maybe try to look at things from outside of your own particular experience. Just because something is easy for you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy for everybody. Have some compassion, have the ability to understand that, just because something's easy for you, maybe it's a struggle for someone else. Have that compassion, have that tolerance, learn from the mistakes of Mufasa. If Mufasa would have been tolerant, if Mufasa would have been compassionate, if Mufasa would have been able to see things beyond his privileged position as an apex predator and an alpha of his pride, then the hyenas never would have entertained Scar because they would have already had everything that they needed. So that's my spiel on Mufasa the tyrant, because yes, I do believe he is a villain of the movie. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know we got a little political, but I think it was important. I think it really helped convey the message. I don't think it was political just for the sake of being political. So next week, it is Dennis Nedry from Jurassic Park. For those who don't recognize the name, that is the that is the character who in Jurassic Park, the guy who was played by the same actor who did Newman on Seinfeld, who was stealing the embryos and created a computer virus that shut the park down and kind of triggered the events of the movie. We're going to look at Dennis Nedry and we're going to view him in the role that he's not this bad guy that he's being made out to be. So, as always, I'm your host, Tony B, and you all be safe out there.